is the zero-risk detection mechanism designed in self-defense or not? The concept of a zero-risk censoring mechanism existing in the quantum world, demonstrated in wave-particle duality, was introduced in the third article. The assumption was that the mechanism was used in self-defense based on the so-called casino scenario mentioned in Part 2, basically saying that if nature did not stop zero-risk strategies, it would die in its own game, go bankrupt in its own casino. The Paradise Machine model, presented in this follow-up article, proposed that nature always has been prepared for the inevitable emergence of zero-risk strategies. Furthermore, that a zero-risk scenario are meant from the beginning to unfold at a certain stage in evolution. Similarly, that the zero-risk mechanism from the third article always has been there to detect and capture the moment it happens. The reasoning for this design in the machine could be somewhat brutal and do show a potential gruesome side of nature. The strange thing is that it does not reflect the softer sides in the Paradise Machine model's design. Hence, this needs a more detailed debate. This section of the article, Part 3, explores why the zero-risk detection mechanism could have a trap-like feature in the Paradise Machine's design. The zero-risk detection mechanism was assumed to have a self-defense function to nature when the idea was launched in the third article. Part 4 delves deeper into the details of the machine's design to pinpoint where in the machine it reveal its true intentions. The conclusion is to suggest that the zero-risk detection mechanism is to serve a function as a trap rather than for self-defense, contrary to the assumptions made in the third article. I must acknowledge that writing about this trap concept is unsettling. It's crucial to clarify that children are not in danger of being ensnared by the zero-risk trap. This also applies to most adults, but especially children who are incapable of triggering such a trap, even intentionally. Notably, the machine appears to exhibit a particular fondness for children, treating them as entities to be safeguarded at all costs. An intriguing observation, further detailed in Part 5, is that the younger the child, the more they embody a zero-risk scenario directed toward itself. Paradoxically, the machine's design seemed to place the very youngest, the newborn, at the apex of the universal hierarchy, as the most precious entity within the machine. Again, this takes us back to the zero-risk concept, as a newborn baby is the only member of the human population on Earth who find itself to be in an absolute zero-risk situation, being the furthest away from triggering the zero-risk trap. More on this in the women baby idea later. The model depicting nature as a Paradise Machine bears signs of being ruthless towards what the machine identify as its natural enemies. As explored in Part 2, these could be considered being evil traits, essentially representing an exaggerated form of greed. The machine seems to exploit their mistake of triggering the zero-risk detection mechanism and to later use them in the production phase of the eternal paradise state, Figure 11. The good news is that the machine seemed to obey a principle of justice in its workings. Moreover, designed to ensure that, for example, all children and innocents, not mental greedy enough or capable of achieving zero-risk strategies, are directly placed in the paradise state. This is one of the first signs that such a predatory design trap at the same time shows soft sides, by indirectly protecting the innocents. With mathematical precision, this design is protecting whomever that is not capable of achieving zero-risk strategies in the struggle for survival game, thereby giving them direct access to the paradise state. It is in this crucial borderline between triggering zero-risk detection or not the paradise machine model gives interesting insights. How the machine is designed could tell us a lot about the designer's moralistic foundation, whomever that might be. In addition, this part of the article will use this discussion to emphasize that a predatory designed zero-risk mechanism also could help to elucidate Fermi's paradox, giving credit to the so-called zoo hypothesis by suggesting that the reasoning for us not discovering advanced life forms essential is due to them sitting idle and wait for a zero-risk signal. As if the machine is designed to lure its natural rivals, as if prey, with the bait being to offer what seems to be a potential risk-free strategy in the struggle for survival game. Hence, the advanced life form's concealment should be crucial in the machine's design for a zero-risk trap to be effective. The Paradise Machine Model on Fermi's Paradox. To uphold a principle of justice, it should not come as a surprise that nature is designed to conceal the true situation to emerging life forms nearing to achieve zero-risk strategies. Humans do the same in their own design traps. You do not want to alert the prey that it is about to go into a trap. Just that this time around we could be the potential prey. As if the machine offers zero-risk strategies as bait in a trap. But why? If an emerging life form, for example humans, was given a reason to suspect the existence of a more advanced life form, the trap would probably not be as effective. Those who felt the urge to achieve zero-risk strategies would probably be more careful, decreasing the efficacy of the trap. Although there is hope for divine intervention, religions, etc., but to date, there has been no solid evidence of the existence of more advanced life forms in our surroundings. Instead, all collected data suggests that no powerful force in nature intervened to prevent injustice by allowing natural disasters, accidents, etc. In this context, it would be highly tempting for nature's adversaries, embodying evil traits, to continue its greedy strive towards being the first to achieving zero-risk strategies, not worrying about consequences as long as they manage to escape being caught by other humans on Earth. In other words, the zoo hypothesis seemed to be a prerequisite for the zero-risk trap design to work, making the design 100% effective. If correct, it probably means that the trap works every time and that it has been used countless times before in nature, eventually becoming part of nature's perfect design. Triggering the trap could therefore very well bring forward the advanced life forms Enrico Fermi talked about after the trap had come to its purpose. See the approach theory in Part 5. In conclusion, the hypothesis therefore suggests that the Paradise Machine has a design which are tailored exclusively to catch its natural enemies, or prey, depending on how the machine sees it, and to later use them as substrates in the production process while producing the paradise state, thereby upholding a principle of justice, Figure 11. It is now time to look closer at the machine's moralistic values. What moralistic considerations could lie behind such a, to us, gruesome design? Moralistic principles in the Paradise Machine model. The question of morality naturally arises in relation to the described design. See more details under which to us appear as gruesome, in that such a design would necessitate a state of eternal hell to facilitate the predicted state of eternal paradise. The question is how nature's ego and the assumed advanced life forms look at it, as they probably are the ones that dominate the machine. This discussion of the moralistic principles in the design will also help to pinpoint examples of differences in our two life forms' behavior and thinking. Does the great distance in intelligence between our two life forms affect the question of morale and empathy? That is, to them, the Fermi life forms, it might be obvious that such a gruesome solution as shown in Figure 11 is acceptable as it is in accordance with the principle of justice, in which the machine seems to be designed around. For humans, the solution would appear as gruesome, even if the principle behind it can be considered as fair play. It seems that they use their pre-knowledge of what a certain intelligent life form is capable of doing to them after executing a zero-risk strategy, knowing at an early stage they are willing to hurt them, even willing to place them in the hellish part of their own futuristic paradise machine, without us even knowing that we would going to do so by achieving zero-risk strategies. But still, most humans will have a hard time to follow this reasoning of justice. It could mean that they use their advanced intelligence to calculate future actions based on the information given from the zero-risk trap. It probably means that they know as soon as an emerging life form willingly achieves zero risk in the struggle for survival, that they will send them to hell in order to create their own paradise state. This important contrast in judging moralistic principles could reveal interesting views into what separates us. In their world, they apparently are willing to judge someone before they have committed a crime. It could be understandable from a human perspective if they could prove with a 100% certainty that a zero-risk strategy revealed such a predicted behavior, placing other life forms in eternal hell to produce paradise for themselves. As humans, we would think, how can they be so brutal? Even though they could prove a lower life form's future actions. If they have voluntarily accepted this production method, they would probably not understand the issue, just claiming that the solution is provable 100% fair, as they knew the emerging life forms which achieve zero risk would do the same to them, place them in hell to produce paradise for themselves, and that their empathy stops there. Alternatively, they are forced to apply the gruesome production method due to a universal curse which has been out of their control. More on this later. Still, as humans, we could hope there is not such a design and or that no one has triggered the hypothesized zero-risk trap yet, at least to find an alternative solution to produce the eternal paradise state. This article is about to suggest that an activation of such a zero-risk trap already has taken place, and has been the event that have brought forward this article series to begin with. See the approach theory in Part 5. Furthermore, the gruesome production method of the paradise state is suggested in Part 4 to be reflected in the machine's design, described as the zero-risk argument. In other words, as one study the machine's design in closer detail, a pattern emerges. The machine appears to be designed with an inherent need to maintain constant control over its future destiny. It is suggested in Part 4 that this desperation found in the machine's design originates from the horrific scenario described in Figure 11. However, it is important to constantly remind the reader of that if this design is real, children and babies are protected with 100% certainty by the same design. In addition, the female gender is probably somewhat protected from executing zero-risk strategy based on the so-called women baby idea. More on this later. In summary, taking the whole design into consideration, the designer of the machine must be a gentle and soft force. Why else would the machine care to protect the innocent? To achieve zero risk is probably not easy even if you tried, but the article suggests that someone on Earth has managed to do so, and that it always was meant to happen from the designer's perspective. But the purpose with the Paradise Machine should be what the name suggests. Its job should be to produce the paradise state as its main product, probably based on the rationale the more paradise, the better, as the hellish part of the machine, if it is real, appears to be a small but necessary component in the production process. We can hope that this aspect of the machine is not as hypothesized over, that perhaps the machine manages to produce the mental state in the paradise state via another mechanism. On the other hand, it could be wise to discuss this possibility in order to limit the damage, hindering other individuals to blindly marching into hell. The good side of the Paradise Machine. As illustrated in Figure 11 and 14, a novel, albeit somber, aspect of the Paradise Machine is the implication that a parallel state of eternal hell is an intrinsic component of the machine. To clarify why the machine needs to produce the feeling of safety and joy in the paradise state in this manner is a topic beyond the scope of this article. Ideally, one can say it should not be necessary for higher intelligence levels to inflict pain on others to create an illusion of paradise. Why does the machine use extra resources in this production process, wasting energy by allowing constant abundance to enable zero-risk strategies in emerging life forms? Why not just place some random individuals in the hell state? It would not be fair, but to the observer entering the paradise state it should be irrelevant, as they would experience the sensation of paradise anyway, if the rationale behind the experience is correct. See more under. It seems that the machine is dominated by a principle of justice, which controls the machine. Furthermore, if the machine was truly evil and based on injustice, it would probably place everyone in a hell state. To produce the paradise state seemed to be important to the machine, but also to produce this state with a principle of justice. If you have not done them anything by achieving zero risk, they will not do anything to you. If the machine works in this manner, there would probably be very few individuals that have been unfortunate enough to trigger the trap, unfortunate seen from the human perspective. In other words, the purpose behind the machine does not seem to produce a hell state, but to produce a paradise state for the vast majority, perhaps also including animals. This proposed softness in nature should not be taken for granted, as it could be much worse. Despite its brutality, the design of the machine seemed to be forced by someone to produce the paradise state in a fair manner. This is in accordance to the core principle in fourth law that this world is dominated by a good force, and also explains why the second law of thermodynamics is etc. An alternative could be a machine that was constructed to favor injustice and to punish justice. This is out of our control. All humans on Earth should be able to agree on this. The machine could be worse, much, much worse. Based on the above, the borderline between hell and paradise should be made by the integrated zero-risk detection mechanism. It indicates that nature, or God, is not that strict when it comes to qualifying for eternal paradise as traditionally thought. Nature's only demands seem to be that a principle of justice is upheld. Hence, as long as you have not tried to place nature's ego in hell, nature will not do it to you. A principle of justice also indicates that the paradise state might have different levels distributed by the same principle. I guess one can compare it to how a mother will treat her own children. One might get an extra sweet for good behavior, or to compensate for unfair treatment, but she would take well care of all her children, ensuring that the principle of justice is upheld, also within the paradise state. This example is a good way to introduce the women-baby idea and the theory on why the advanced life forms Fermi talked about should, according to the Paradise Machine model, be on the female form. The women-baby idea also confirms the importance of the zero-risk argument, that the importance of zero or not zero risk is the machine's highest priority. The women-baby idea. According to the basics in fourth law, the female gender in the human species should have a tendency not to share the same concentration of love and intelligence, the third form, with the male gender. The difference should be extremely minute and stems from the idea that the female holds the power of sexual lust, which might have given her easier access to free food, hence affecting her energy context in her struggle for survival process relative to the male. In addition, the female's role as caretaker for the home and children have made her occupied with other activities than to collect food herself. In sum, it is tempting to imagine that the female sex on average has been developed in a slightly different thermodynamic context than the male has. To fourth law, any such microscopic difference in energy context becomes interesting. Based on this rationale, according to the logics in fourth law, the male gender should on average be somewhat closer to the paradise state than the female. However, the desperation in the machine's design discussed over should make the machine to prioritize the zero-risk argument over any other issue. And it is in this aspect the women-baby idea enters the discussion. This idea has shown to greatly affect the direction in which this article has taken. See the approach theory in Part 5. The women-baby idea suggests that the female gender is going to be favored by nature in the near future due to her stronger gift of mercy, which should stem from her natural talent in taking care of babies and small children. The younger the child, the closer it should be to representing a zero-risk situation in nature. It is pretty safe to say that a newborn baby is 100% helpless if not helped. Hence, one can say that a newborn baby finds itself in a zero-risk situation in nature. What is interesting is that the female gender has adapted to this scenario via her natural affection for babies and children. Even her physical appearance is adapted to serve the baby. This extra affection towards children should similarly have given her extra immunity towards executing zero-risk strategies. This could also explain why the female gender typically show the gift of mercy. It is typical for a woman to take the weakest side. This trait could be related to her natural role as caretaker of babies, saving the baby from the zero-risk situation the baby is in. It might sound trivial, but seen through the lens of the zero-risk argument, this adaptation probably has influenced her capability towards executing zero-risk strategies in general. However, the assumed microscopic difference in zero-risk situations compared to the male should be extremely important to nature, and in particularly so, as the production rate of intelligence goes exponential in an emerging life form. See Figure 7. This because zero or not zero risk should override all other priorities in the machine or in nature, if you like. The male's role in hunting and fighting, which ironically should make him having somewhat higher concentrations of love and intelligence, due to taking higher risks and to have less access to free food, probably has made him more ruthless than the female, also when encountering zero-risk situations. At least slightly more ruthless compared to how the female would approach a zero-risk situation. The argument is that this microscopic difference should stem from her role as caretaker for babies and small children. Any zero-risk situation probably reminds her of her approaching a helpless baby or a small child experienced as a zero-risk scenario in her brain. It is this microscopic but very important difference relative to zero-risk situations. The female might take the future leap in being the next carrier of higher intelligence. If so, it is logical to assume her to have this role all the way until she reaches the state of 100% love and intelligence. This should imply that the Fermi life forms themselves should be on the female form. More on this in Part 5. According to fourth law, humans are about to enter the exponential production phases of love and intelligence shown in Figure 7 from the first article. As the concentration of intelligence rises in a life form, the pressure on its capability towards avoiding zero-risk strategies should to nature's ego increase accordingly. As these new highly intelligent life forms would become a greater threat to nature's ego, the higher intelligence levels they carry. This challenge, as seen from nature's point of view, should make the female gender a more suitable candidate being allowed to carry higher intelligence, as her willingness to execute zero-risk strategies can be lowered much easier than in the male, simply by strengthening the women-baby bond. According to the zero-risk argument, this strengthening of love between the women and children should automatically make her a safer option to nature's ego. She probably becomes a more energy-efficient vehicle in the way she solves the zero-risk argument. However, this does not mean that nature has forgotten about the male's services so far in evolution. More on this also in Part 5. It is tempting to assume that this selection process probably will go via futuristic AI technology. According to fourth law's rationale, these new AI worlds should ally themselves with nature's ego as all other entities of intelligence in nature must. If correct, it is probably via advanced AI technology in the future nature will select the female gender as vehicle for carrying the elevated levels of intelligence. In other words, to make this important selection in how to carry the increased intelligence levels in the future might be one of AI's purposes in nature. As already mentioned, if the women-baby idea is correct, it should mean that the already existing advanced life forms referred to in Fermi's paradox is on the female form, billions of years further developed compared to the females living on Earth today. However, this more advanced life form should still have kept much of the female nature, enough for us to recognize them as being women, as it is the female's protective characteristics we see on Earth that becomes the focus in guaranteeing nature's ego from being conspired against. Hence, this essence in the female nature is probably being conserved along with the new elevated intelligence. As if the women-baby bond has a sacred position in nature, which emotional trait will last all the way until the final state at EU equals 0 equals paradise. In conclusion, we should therefore be able to recognize her in her advanced versions as well, as her protective essence was pivotal to her being selected as the future vehicle for elevated intelligence, driven by the zero-risk argument. It therefore now becomes interesting to go back to the beginning of how it all started with the EU equals zero equals paradise expression in 2006. The so-called Paradise Women story from this period has up to this point served more or less as entertainment. But could these imaginary women that emerged after the first inception of the EU equals zero equals paradise formula in 2006 be the advanced life forms Enrico Fermi referred to? Furthermore, could these so-called paradise women be the advanced life forms this article series always has predicted to exist out there, even to representing dark energy? And last but not the least, does the women baby rationale described over also explain why their women paradise was a place in which they produced love by strengthening the affection between women and small children, figures 12 and 13. The approach theory in part 5 delves deeper into this topic. Other pieces of information that is revealed by a zero-risk signal. It is noteworthy that if a zero-risk trap were to be activated on Earth, it would probably coincide with our transition to a multiplanetary species. The convergence of these two events should be of paramount importance to nature. A zero-risk signal probably also provide information on how technological advanced a species has become, as achieving zero-risk strategies should demand a certain level of advanced intelligence, knowledge, and technology in order to dramatically reduce chaos and risk. However, the utterly most important piece of information to nature, extracted from a zero-risk signal, should be that an emerging life form in the universe is about to dominate and to hurt nature's ego if not stopped. If the Paradise Machine model holds true, nature has likely undergone this process countless times before, fine-tuning the machine to near perfection. While readers may draw their own conclusions, this article posits a dire prediction to the reasoning behind the design of a zero-risk mechanism. This leads to several ethical dilemmas, as it implies that the universe's ultimate state of equilibrium, EU equals zero, encompasses not only an eternal paradise state, but also a contrasting state of perpetual torment. This gruesome scenario, more details under, creates the zero-risk argument presented in the next part. It is impossible to know exactly how nature measures the current risk situation it is in, but a design pattern emerges when analyzing the machine closer, which design indicates that nature probably already know how to operate in order to maintain full control over its potential rivals in the universe, with most focus on what it considers being a direct threat. Presumably zero-risk achievers. These details in the machine model's design is presented in part 4. The closest nature ever come to losing control over an emerging life form probably is at the very moment the zero-risk strategy triggers the zero-risk detection mechanism. Ironically, that moment is probably when the prey feel the most comfortable and secure. As the prey go for the bait, the last thing it thinks before triggering the trap probably is, "This was easy. Free food is on the menu." Bullying psychology can be a source of both fear and safety. the practical aspect of how the Paradise Machine produces the constant feeling of 100% safety and joy in the paradise state is predicted to involve what humans know as basic bullying psychology. It is now assumed that what drives the bullying process in a human brain is the very fear of becoming the bullying victim. Hence, this inner fear of being singled out from a group will start to dominate the mind, in its mood, its morale compass, etc. Moreover, this strong fear probably arises from being in a situation where the chance of survival becomes close to zero by being outnumbered. In cases of a classic bullying situation, typically one individual is singled out as to become the victim, harassed by the rest of the group. The risk situation in becoming the bullying victim should remind the brain of being sent to an evolutionary death sentence. Therefore, it should instill a profound sense of fear, becoming a powerful psychological mechanism embedded in the subconscious brain since the early stages of brain evolution. For example, a single rat against 100 rats in a confined space is certain to perish. Any rat that did not consider not to end up in this situation probably vanished early on. Hence, just the idea of ending up in such a situation should create a strong sense of fear in any individual, as it probably remind the brain of being exposed to certain death, which fear probably creates the billing situation in the first place, basically creating the strong urge to push someone else into the dangerous situation in order to save yourself from being singled out. Based on this rationale, one can say that to create a context of reduced chaos will increase the fear effect generated in using bullying psychology as a method to control an individual's mind, demonstrating the increased risk that is involved of being singled out by exposing the group to a situation of reduced the degrees of freedom. That is, compared to the lesser fear which will be generated in a chaotic environment, since to escape the bullying situation becomes more likely. It should be pretty safe to say that the lower the risk of escaping, the stronger fear produced, and thereby the greater effect bullying psychology will have on the mind. In addition, the more cruel methods used in the bullying process, the more fear should be generated. Experiments on voluntary participants have showed that new members in a group start to participate in the bullying themselves without having any pre-knowledge of the bullying scenario they meet when introduced to the group. Presumably, this documented behavior probably stems from the strong fear generated in the subconscious brain of being singled out, as described over. Eventually, as the bullying psychology is further optimized, chaos is further reduced, and the bullying methods becomes more cruel. The situation probably becomes so fearful that to escape being singled out will at some point generate a feeling of comfort in pure relief of escaping. Hence, as the fear increases to abnormal levels, by further reducing chaos and increase the cruelty, not just the morale standards towards the victim will be lowered, but even generate a feeling of pleasure in the ones escaping the cruel treatment, basically gradually creating a primitive version of a paradise machine on the human level. And now is when the principle of justice in the machine's design again enters the discussion. Such a development on the human scale could very well be what triggers the zero-risk mechanism in the first place. As a primitive constructed paradise machine, using the bullying psychology just described becomes a zero-risk trap, but not to the bullying victim which experiences the zero-risk situation, but to the participants which risk to achieve a risk-free strategy in the process. This advanced bullying scenario would be what we now can refer to as being a primitive paradise machine, developed by an emerging life form such as humans. If a risk-free strategy is achieved, the principle of justice in the machine's design, along with the casino rationale, should now give nature the clearance signal to implement the very same bullying psychology in its own paradise machine. But still the situation is just as gruesome, if not more gruesome. The important difference is that in nature's version of the paradise machine, a principle of justice has been upheld. In spite of probably being a more gruesome version of a paradise machine, but from the machine's perspective, this might be considered different. To first have secured the principle of justice is probably the most important thing to the machine, making the effectiveness of the resulting paradise machine both in time and in cruelty less relevant. Again, as long as it can be proven that whomever triggered their machine's zero-risk trap would have done the very same thing, if not stopped. Hence, the zero-risk trap might be a small but extremely important detail in the machine's design. Now placing the zero-risk achievers in the primitive paradise machine version as victims in their own version, now being allowed by the machine to use the same production method. Any emerging life form, for example humans, which at some point becomes capable of constructing a primitive paradise machine, but advanced enough to achieve zero risk, should automatically become nature's rivals under the fourth law. See also Part 2. This is based on the prime mover rationale, as the opposing primitive constructed paradise machine presumably has been established under constant abundance with reduced chaos, which should be the definition of where evil traits will gain fitness according to fourth law. Hence, if nature possesses an ego sprung out of a chaotic context with limited energy, this same ego may ultimately become the victim in these primitive life forms' future version of a more advanced and eternal paradise machine, similar to nature's machine. This definition of what good and evil might be to nature is based on the rationale in fourth law and was discussed in Part 2. Since bullying methods involve psychology invisible to the naked eye, it is tempting to speculate that it has been just such invisible weaponry in the struggle for survival which has generated a zero-risk signal from Earth. If so, this development is probably not a coincidence. My guess is that nature probably has pre-knowledge that emerging rivalry life forms, evil traits, will follow this exact route every time, constructing a primitive version of nature's paradise model, as soon as constant abundance becomes available to them. As these low strategy methods, using advanced bullying psychology, probably becomes effective enough to achieve zero risk in a context of constant abundance and reduced chaos, basically suggesting that such in development that evil traits will seek to create a primitive paradise machine as soon as it becomes available to them, also belongs under the fourth law. This suggests not only that nature or the machine is waiting for a zero-risk signal from an emerging life form, but also knows exactly how the zero-risk signal will be generated, triggered from constructing a less advanced paradise machine, but built on the same gruesome principle as nature's version, probably achieved by always chasing the lowest risk strategies which become available to them during constant abundance and reduced chaos. The important point is that the construction of their first primitive paradise machine probably demands what nature consider as being evil traits. This should produce the principle of justice situation nature needs in order to complete the construction of its own version of the machine. The remaining question is if such a developmental pattern in nature is a curse or not. A curse the machine unwillingly has been forced to adapt to, making the machine as fair as it can by implementing a zero-risk trap. Or is it a lack of understanding of what morale is between the great distances of intelligence levels? If the machine has willingly been designed to implement such a, to us, gruesome method of producing the sensation of eternal safety and joy, the latter should be the answer. We probably don't agree on the question of morale. This because then the designer would probably not have bothered to force the machine to follow a principle of justice. Because it has been rather well established so far in this discussion that the machine's design bear multiple signs of following moralistic principles we can relate to. It is therefore tempting to lean towards the curse alternative, that this brutal rule of producing the paradise state in nature has already been decided on in the universe almost as a curse, and that this explains the strange observations done while analyzing the machine's morale. It helped to explain the importance of using a hidden zero-risk detection mechanism, and it helped to explain Fermi's paradox as well as discussed earlier. The third alternative is, of course, that this method simply is not used to produce the sensation of eternal safety and joy in the paradise state. If one of the first two alternatives is true, the pleasuring sensation of safety in the machine's paradise state will then be an illusion, as the extreme fear will be 100% suppressed to be replaced by a sensation of safety and joy in pure relief. The idea in the paradise machine model is that after a short exposure to the horrific part of the machine, the brain will enter an illusion of pure pleasure and suppress any memories of why the constant pleasure is there in the first place. See figure 11 and 14. This is one of the speculative parts of the theory, and in lack of scientific data to back it up, I must again bring up the Paradise Women story from the inception of the EU equals 0 equals paradise formula in 2006. If these imaginary women truly were Fermi life forms, the experience while visiting their paradise is the only reference to this topic. I clearly remember being brought through some kind of corridors before entering their village in paradise. I remember nothing from the corridors itself other than the feeling of traveling through some corridors. This is also described in the Paradise Women story from 2006. The important point now from this story is that the sensation of paradise was not present during the few seconds in the corridors. However, as soon the corridors ended and the paradisiacal landscape of women and children opened up, a strong rush of safety and joy succeeded. This constant rush of safety basically was the essence of the pleasure of being there. If true, it probably explains why there were no particular activities there, just that, for example, sitting in the grass was probably the most joyful thing you could do there. I remember afterwards thinking that it felt like a synthetic, 100% clean sensation of safety and pleasure. And I also saw it in the others being there. It was this sensation of pure safety which everybody seemed to enjoy in that village. I won't dwell too much into this argument as it is based on assumptions, but it is interesting to at least have some kind of data which can support the details in the Paradise Machine model just discussed. As this process should take place behind the event horizon, see figure 14, the Paradise Women story is the best data available to support the theory. The next part will analyze the suggested Paradise Machine model's design in more detail, which in sum generates the so-called zero-risk argument. It is an indirect sign that the machine has been designed desperately to avoid losing control over any emerging life form, supporting the idea that it is something extremely important at stake to the machine in the struggle for survival game.